Aaliyah's 32nd birthday should have been magical. She sat at Giuseppe's, an upscale bistro, dressed in a forest green dress that perfectly matched the twinkling Christmas lights she'd seen on the restaurant's Instagram. But Brandon Hayes had other plans. Loud, deliberate, and cruel, he rejected her in front of the entire room, dismissing her career as glorified babysitting and her natural hair as too much for his circles. Most women might have crumbled. Not Aaliyah. She catalogued every word, every gesture, every humiliating glance. What Brandon didn't know. The woman he was trying to break wasn't just anyone. She was Dr. Aaliyah Johnson, Stanford PhD, expert witness, and about to turn his world upside down. The rejection wasn't her ending. It was just the beginning. 3 days after Brandon's performance, Aaliyah found herself back at Giuseppe's, this time for a professional lunch with a colleague from Northwestern. She'd chosen a different table, one far from the scene of her humiliation, but the Christmas lights still glowed overhead, their warmth doing nothing to thaw the clinical detachment she'd maintained since that night. Her colleague was running late. Aaliyah checked her phone, scrolling through the screenshots Maya had sent, more evidence for the case file, when she sensed someone watching her. A little girl stood beside her table, no more than 5 years old, wearing a red velvet Christmas dress that matched the decorations perfectly. She clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest, and her brown eyes studied Aaliyah with an intensity that reminded her of the children she evaluated in her practice, the ones searching for something they couldn't name. "You look sad like my daddy," the girl said, her voice carrying the sort of honesty only children possess. "Are you sad because you don't have a family either?" The question landed with unexpected force. Aaliyah opened her mouth to offer the kind of gentle deflection she'd perfected in her career, but the child continued, undeterred by adult hesitation. "Can you be my new mom?" Before Aaliyah could process the request, a man appeared, tall, with dark hair touched by premature gray at the temples and eyes that carried the particular exhaustion of grief. He was handsome in the way of men who'd stopped noticing such things about themselves. "Kyla, sweetheart, you can't just," he grabbed his daughter's hand gently, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I am so sorry. She's been doing this lately, asking random women if they'll," he stopped, seeming to realize that explaining might make it worse. "It's fine," Aaliyah heard herself say, though her professional instincts were cataloging everything, the child's attachment-seeking behavior, the father's protective but permissive parenting style, the fresh grief that hung on both of them like expensive cologne. "Daddy says I need to stop asking," Kyla continued, apparently unconcerned with her father's mortification. "But I know when I see someone nice. You have kind eyes. Like mommy's." The man, Julian, he'd introduced himself as Julian Martinez, looked like he wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him. "We should go. Again, I'm so sorry. It's been a difficult year and she's. Do you think my mommy sent you?" Kyla interrupted, reaching out to touch Aaliyah's hand with her small fingers. The teddy bear dangled from her other arm, forgotten. "She promised she'd find me someone before she went to heaven. She promised." Aaliyah, who had written papers on childhood grief and attachment disorders, who had testified in court about the psychological impact of parental loss, who had helped hundreds of children process trauma with clinical precision, found herself completely speechless. Her expertise dissolved in the face of this child's raw, uncomplicated need. She started, but her throat had tightened inexplicably. Julian gently tried to pull Kyla back. "Come on, baby. Let's let the nice lady have her lunch." But Kyla didn't move. She was still holding Aaliyah's hand, still searching her face with those impossibly hopeful eyes. And Aaliyah realized, with a clarity that had nothing to do with her doctorate, that she was looking at a child who'd lost her mother and a father barely holding himself together. She saw the carefully maintained dress, probably the same one Kyla had worn to her mother's funeral, lovingly preserved for special occasions. She saw the teddy bear's worn patches where anxious fingers had rubbed the fabric thin. She saw everything her training had taught her to see. And then she saw something her training hadn't prepared her for, herself, reflected in this child's question. Are you sad because you don't have a family either? Would you, Aaliyah found herself saying, surprising herself as much as Julian. Would you both like to have coffee with me? My colleague just cancelled. The lie came easily. I'm Aaliyah. Julian hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and escape. But Kyla was already climbing into the chair next to Aaliyah's, her teddy bear settled on the table between them. She likes dinosaurs, Kyla announced confidently. I can tell. And she won't leave. Right? Aaliyah looked at the child, really looked at her, and felt something crack in the careful walls she'd built around her heart. Right, she whispered. I won't leave. Maya Torres spread another stack of files across Aaliyah's office desk, her expression growing darker with each document. There's a pattern here. It's so blatant I can't believe no one's caught it before. Aaliyah leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on her nose, scanning the custody evaluation in front of her. The language was clinical, professional, devastating. Chaotic household environment. Cultural differences in parenting approaches that may impact child development. Non-traditional family structure raising concerns about stability. Translation, Maya said bitterly, too poor, too black, too different. The evaluation belonged to a case from 2 years prior. A black grandmother, Patricia Williams, age 58, retired teacher, had sought custody of her grandson after her daughter's death from complications of diabetes. The child's father, a white investment banker named Thomas Whitmore with a documented history of neglect and 2 DUIs, had hired Hayes Consulting Group for a premium evaluation. Cost, $15,000. Hayes Consulting had deemed Patricia's home unsuitable due to outdated parenting philosophies and cultural barriers to attachment that might impede the child's social integration. Thomas Whitmore, despite his record, was described as committed to personal growth and possessing substantial resources to provide optimal developmental opportunities. Patricia had lost custody. The boy, according to follow-up reports Maya had dug up, had been hospitalized twice in Whitmore's care for accidental injuries. Aaliyah's hands shook as she added the file to her case folder. The rage was physical now, burning in her chest. There's more, Maya said quietly. She pulled up a digital document on her laptop. I cross-referenced the names on these evaluations. Guess whose name appears as consulting analyst on at least 15 of them? The name on the screen made Aaliyah's stomach turn, Brandon Hayes, M.A. He doesn't have clinical credentials, Aaliyah said slowly. An M.A. in business administration doesn't qualify him to conduct psychological evaluations. No, Maya agreed. But it qualifies him to know which parents can afford to pay for favorable outcomes. Aaliyah's phone buzzed on her desk. She glanced at it, then wished she hadn't. Brandon, hey, I've been thinking about our date. Maybe I was too harsh. Want to try again? I promise I'll be nicer this time. Smiling face with smiling eyes. She showed Maya, who rolled her eyes. He's texted you 12 times in 3 days. That's not romantic. That's unhinged. Another text arrived before Aaliyah could respond, or are you still being sensitive about what I said? I was just being honest. You should appreciate that. Then, actually, forget it. You're probably not even worth the effort. I was doing you a favor. Aaliyah screenshot each message and forwarded them to a new folder labeled, Hayes, Character Evidence. He's building your case for you, Maya observed. I know. Aaliyah returned her attention to the files. Pull everything with his name on it. Every evaluation, every intake note, every billing record. I want to see the full scope. By the end of the day, they'd identified a pattern so consistent it bordered on algorithmic. Parents who paid Hayes Consulting's premium fees received evaluations emphasizing their stability, commitment, and resources. Parents who couldn't afford the premium service, or who were assigned court-appointed evaluations at reduced rates, were systematically pathologized with coded language about cultural differences, non-traditional structures, or chaotic environments. The coding was clever. Never overtly racist. Always professionally phrased. But unmistakable in its bias. They're not just destroying careers, Aaliyah said, echoing what would later become Simone Wright's words. They're destroying families. And they're doing it for profit. Her phone buzzed again. Brandon, you know what? I googled you. Stanford PhD. Big deal. You're still affirmative action all the way. Must be nice getting everything handed to you. Screenshot. Forward. Save. Keep texting, Brandon, Aaliyah murmured. Please keep texting. Simone Wright's office occupied the 23rd floor of a building that overlooked Lake Michigan, but the view was wasted on the attorney. Every inch of wall space was covered with case files, legal briefs, and photographs of families, reunited and separated. I've been trying to build this case for 18 months, Simone said, her dark eyes sharp with an intensity that reminded Aaliyah of prosecutors she'd worked with. Hayes Consulting has destroyed 47 families that I can document. 47 children removed from loving homes and placed with parents who could pay for favorable evaluations. She spread files across her conference table, each one a story of institutional cruelty disguised as professional assessment. But I need an expert witness. Someone with credentials so impeccable that Hayes's attorneys can't discredit them. Someone who can explain, in terms a jury will understand, exactly how these evaluations violate every clinical and ethical standard in the field. Aaliyah picked up a file at random. A Mexican immigrant mother who'd lost custody because Hayes Consulting deemed her culturally incompatible with American parenting standards. The father, a white attorney with family money, had paid $18,000 for his evaluation. They don't just destroy careers, Dr. Johnson. Simone's voice was quiet but fierce. They destroy families. And they do it for profit. I'll do it, Aaliyah said. I'll be your expert witness. Simone's relief was visible. Thank you. This won't be easy. Hayes Consulting has resources, connections, lawyers who'll come after your credibility. Let them try. Aaliyah thought of Brandon's texts, his social media posts, his public humiliation of her. I have evidence they won't expect. After the meeting, Aaliyah found herself drawn back to Giuseppe's. She told herself it was because she'd left her scarf there last time, but the truth waited at a corner table where a little girl in a purple dress, not the red one this time, bounced excitedly in her seat. You came back. Kyla shouted, loud enough to turn heads. Julian stood quickly, balancing a tray of hot chocolates. I'm sorry, she insisted on waiting. I told her you probably wouldn't. I left my scarf, Aaliyah said, the lie feeling more comfortable now. It's behind the bar, Julian offered. But, would you like to join us? Kyla's been talking about you non-stop. Apparently you're an expert on dinosaurs now. Aaliyah found herself sitting down. Kyla immediately began explaining her elaborate theory about how T-Rexes could actually be good pets, if you trained them right and gave them the right food and maybe built a really big backyard. Over hot chocolate that was too sweet and Kyla's breathless chatter, Aaliyah learned about Julian's work as an architect, his recent designs for corporate offices, and his quiet confession that he was struggling to balance work with single parenthood. Elena, my wife, she was better at this, he said, his voice catching slightly. She knew how to help Kyla process things. I'm trying. Aaliyah watched Kyla color on a placemat the waiter had provided, her small tongue poking out in concentration. The attachment-seeking behavior. The preoccupation with replacement relationships. The performance of happiness masking deeper grief. She's processing the way children do, Aaliyah said gently. By seeking connection and testing boundaries. She's actually doing remarkably well given what she's been through. Julian looked at her with something like hope. You think so? I know so. But she could use support. Have you considered grief counseling for children? I've tried. She won't talk to the counselors. She might talk to me, Aaliyah said before she could stop herself. If you'd like. I specialize in childhood trauma and attachment. Kyla looked up from her coloring. Would that mean you visit us more? Aaliyah met Julian's eyes and saw her own loneliness reflected there. Yes, she said. It would mean I visit more. Brandon Hayes sat in his father's corner office, barely listening to the lecture about optics and maintaining professional standards. His attention was on his phone, scrolling through the legal documents his father had shoved across the desk. Dr. A. Johnson, his father was saying, his voice tight with controlled fury. Expert witness for the plaintiff. Stanford credentials, congressional testimony, published research in every major journal. This woman is going to crucify us if we're not careful. Brandon barely registered the name. His mind was still on the brunette from the bar last night, the one who'd actually appreciated his Princeton connections. Are you even listening? Gerald Hayes snapped. Yeah. Some expert witness. We'll discredit her like we always do. What Brandon didn't know, what his arrogance wouldn't allow him to consider, was that Dr. Johnson was currently sitting in her home office, surrounded by case files, watching his latest text message appear on her screen. You know what your problem is? The message read. You're bitter because someone finally told you the truth about your place. But I'm a nice guy, so I'll give you another chance if you lose the attitude. It was 2 a.m. Brandon had clearly been drinking. Aaliyah screenshot the message, her expression neutral. Maya had taught her to save everything to 3 separate cloud services. Nothing would be lost. She typed her response with clinical precision. This conversation may be used in legal proceedings. Have a good evening, Mr. Hayes. Another message arrived immediately, legal proceedings. Are you threatening me? Do you know who my family is? Screenshot. Save. Forward to Simone. By morning, Brandon had posted on social media, a vague update about people trying to ruin family businesses with false accusations, and DEI hires who think they're experts but can't handle basic criticism. The comments section filled quickly. His friends from Princeton, his colleagues from Hayes Consulting, all rallying around him. Stay strong, man. These people always play the victim. You can't say anything anymore without someone getting offended. Maya called at 6 a.m. He's doing it again. Building your case. I know, Aaliyah said, watching the posts multiply. He genuinely doesn't think he's done anything wrong. That's because he hasn't faced consequences yet. Aaliyah thought of Patricia Williams, who'd lost her grandson to a man with 2 DUIs because she couldn't afford Hayes Consulting's premium services. She thought of the Mexican mother deemed culturally incompatible. She thought of 47 families destroyed for profit. He will, she promised. Julian's home was everything Aaliyah expected from an architect: clean lines, abundant natural light, spaces that flowed together with intentional grace. But it was the child's artwork covering one entire wall, Elena's wall, Julian explained quietly, that revealed the home's true heart. Mommy liked my drawings, Kyla said, following Aaliyah's gaze. Daddy keeps them up so she can see them from heaven. Aaliyah's professional assessment noted the healthy memorialization, the secure attachment despite loss. But the woman beneath the credentials simply ached for this small family trying to hold itself together. Their therapy sessions, she'd stopped calling them consultations, had evolved into something deeper. Today, Kyla was playing with dolls, unconsciously working through her grief by having the mommy doll go on a long trip and the little girl doll wait for someone new. Julian made coffee in the kitchen while Aaliyah observed. He'd seemed lighter lately, she noticed. The grief still shadowed him, but something else was emerging, something that appeared when he looked at her. I need to tell you something, he said, returning with 2 mugs. About my current project. He explained about the office renovation contract. A consulting firm downtown. Only recently had he learned what they actually did, the family court evaluations, the custody cases. Hayes Consulting Group, he finished, watching her face carefully. Aaliyah went very still. "You're designing their new offices." "I was. I pulled out of the contract yesterday." He sat down heavily. "Once I understood what they do, how they operate." Elena would have hated it. She always said our work should build things up, not tear families apart. That must have been a significant financial loss. "Some things are worth more than money." His eyes met hers. "Elena taught me that. You're reminding me of it." Later, after Kyla had tired herself out and fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, her small hand found Aaliyah's. Julian, on Aaliyah's other side, whispered, "She hasn't been this peaceful in months." "Whatever you're doing, thank you." Aaliyah looked down at the sleeping child, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, and felt something shift in her carefully controlled world. This wasn't therapeutic intervention anymore. This wasn't professional distance. She was falling in love with this child. And possibly her father. "I should go," she said softly, not moving. "You should," Julian agreed, also not moving. They sat there in the dimming light, Kyla sleeping between them, the television playing a movie none of them were watching. Outside, Chicago prepared for winter. Inside, something new was beginning to grow. That night, back in her office, Aaliyah discovered Brandon's intake notes from 3 years prior. A black single mother described as having aggressive presentation and showing cultural incompatibility with court expectations. Her child had been removed and placed with the white father who'd hired Hayes Consulting. The mother's aggressive presentation. She'd asked questions about the evaluation process and requested to see Hayes Consulting's credentials. Aaliyah added the notes to her growing file. Brandon wasn't just complicit in his family's corruption. He was an active architect of it. The Chicago Tribune article appeared on a Tuesday morning, above the fold, "Impossible to ignore, pay to parent, how one firm's bias destroyed families." Brandon saw it on his phone while still in bed. His hands went numb as he scrolled through the devastating exposé. Anonymous accounts from parents who'd lost custody. Statistical analysis showing Hayes Consulting's evaluation outcomes correlated almost perfectly with client payment tiers. Expert commentary on the coded racist language in their reports. And then, buried in the 6th paragraph, his own words staring back at him. In now-deleted social media posts, Hayes Consulting analyst Brandon Hayes described a professional woman as a glorified babysitter, and suggested her natural hair was too much for his social circles, comments that reflect the same racial bias present in the firm's custody evaluations. His father called 30 seconds later. "Get to the office. Now." The Illinois Department of Children and Family Services had launched an investigation at dawn. Federal regulators weren't far behind. By the time Brandon arrived at Hayes Consulting, reporters crowded the lobby and his father's face had aged a decade overnight. "Who did this?" Gerald demanded. "Who gave them our internal documents?" The lead investigator provided the answer, Dr. Aaliyah Johnson, expert witness from multiple plaintiffs. "She's compiled evidence of systematic bias in your evaluations going back 7 years. Brandon's legs nearly gave out. "Who?" He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and Googled the name. Dr. Aaliyah Johnson. Stanford PhD, Congressional Testimony on Family Separation Policies. Expert in Childhood Trauma and Attachment Disorders. Published research in. His phone slipped from his hands as recognition hit him with physical force. The woman from the restaurant. The blind date. The one he'd humiliated in front of everyone at Giuseppe's. She wasn't just some woman. She was Dr. Aaliyah Johnson. And he'd given her every piece of ammunition she needed, in public, on social media, in text messages he'd sent at 2 a.m. He'd handed his enemy the weapons to destroy him, and he'd been too arrogant to even realize who she was. "The expert witness," he whispered. "A. Johnson. It's. I know her." His father turned slowly. "What?" "I went on a date with her." A blind date. I didn't know who she was. I didn't, Brandon's voice cracked. I said things. Posted things. Gerald's face went from red to white. What did you post? Brandon couldn't answer. He was scrolling through the Tribune article again, seeing how his own words had been weaponized against his family's firm. How his casual racism at a restaurant had become evidence of institutional discrimination. How the woman he dismissed as too complex for a black woman was actually a world-class expert who just orchestrated his family's complete destruction. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have learned my name, Brandon. Professional courtesy. Dr. Johnson. Brandon appeared at Aaliyah's university office on a Thursday afternoon, pushing past her assistant with the desperation of a drowning man. You have to stop this, he said, his voice ragged. This vendetta. My father's firm is falling apart. Do you understand what you're doing? Aaliyah looked up from her desk, her expression unchanged. I understand exactly what I'm doing, Mr. Hayes. I'm ensuring that Hayes Consulting Group can never again profit from separating families. It's not, you're twisting everything. Making it seem like your firm systematically provided biased evaluations that favored wealthy clients while pathologizing minority and low-income parents. She stood, her voice clinically precise. Because that's exactly what your firm did. What you personally participated in. I was just following procedures. Procedures that violated every ethical standard in family psychology. Procedures that destroyed 47 documented families. Procedures, her voice finally showed emotion, that removed children from loving homes and placed them with parents who could afford to pay for favorable outcomes. Brandon's face flushed. This is because I rejected you. You're just bitter. Security arrived before he could finish. Campus police had been alerted by her assistant. Brandon made the mistake of raising his voice, of making vague threats, all captured on the office's security camera. One more piece of evidence. One more demonstration of character. The depositions began the following week. Aaliyah watched through a video feed as Gerald Hayes sat across from Simone Wright, surrounded by attorneys, confronted with evaluation after evaluation showing systematic bias. Can you explain, Simone asked, her voice steady, why parents who paid your premium fees received evaluations using words like stable, committed, and resource-rich, while parents who couldn't afford premium services were described with terms like chaotic, culturally different, and non-traditional? Gerald's attorney objected. The objection was overruled. Can you explain why your son, Brandon Hayes, who holds only an MA in business administration, conducted psychological intake interviews and made clinical notations about parents' cultural compatibility? Another objection. Another overruling. Former employees testified about quotas, about being told to adjust findings, based on payment tiers, about the unspoken understanding that Hayes Consulting Group served clients, not children. Then it was Aaliyah's turn. She sat in the deposition room, surrounded by opposing counsel, and methodically dismantled every evaluation Hayes Consulting had ever produced. She explained clinical standards. She cited ethical guidelines. She showed, with devastating precision, how Hayes Consulting's practices violated basic principles of child welfare assessment. Dr. Johnson, opposing counsel, finally attempted, isn't it true you have a personal vendetta against Mr. Brandon Hayes? Aaliyah met his eyes steadily. I have a professional obligation to report unethical practices. Mr. Hayes's personal behavior toward me simply provided additional evidence of the discriminatory attitudes that permeate Hayes Consulting Group's work. She paused, then added, would you like me to explain the correlation between his social media posts and the coded language in your firm's evaluations? Because I can. I have a 40-page analysis prepared. The attorney declined. He had no more questions. The settlement came 6 weeks later, $12 million, distributed to affected families. Hayes Consulting Group's license to practice in Illinois was revoked. Federal investigations opened in 3 additional states. Gerald Hayes retired in disgrace. Brandon Hayes, unemployable in his field, moved to his mother's house in Connecticut. But none of that mattered as much to Aaliyah as the piece of paper Kyla thrust at her during family day at her elementary school. "We had to draw our families," Kyla explained, bouncing with excitement. The drawing showed 3 stick figures, one labeled Daddy, one labeled Kyla, and one, taller than the others, with carefully colored brown skin and elaborate curly hair, labeled Miss Aaliyah, who's gonna be my new mommy because she has a big heart and dinosaurs are cool and she makes Daddy smile again. Julian stood beside Aaliyah, his hand finding hers as they looked at their daughter's artwork. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. "About any of it." Aaliyah felt tears sliding down her face, the first time she'd cried in front of anyone in years. Not tears of grief or anger, but something entirely different. Something that felt like coming home. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Be part of a family. I've spent so long building walls. Then we'll learn together." Julian turned her to face him. "Elena would have loved you. And Kyla already does. The question is, do you love us?" Aaliyah looked at the little girl who'd asked a stranger to be her mother. The girl who'd seen past credentials and accomplishments to the lonely woman beneath. The girl who'd cracked open her carefully guarded heart with pure, uncomplicated hope. "Yes," she said. "I love you. Both of you." Kyla squealed and launched herself at Aaliyah, nearly knocking her over. "Daddy," she said. "Yes. She's gonna be my mom." That night, Julian officially asked Aaliyah to consider co-parenting Kyla. Not rushing into marriage, they both needed time, but building something real. Something lasting. "I know this isn't conventional," he said. "But nothing about us has been conventional." Aaliyah thought about Brandon's rejection, about how humiliation had led to justice, about how a case against corruption had led her to this moment. "Conventional is overrated," she said. Above them, the same Christmas lights from Giuseppe's twinkled in Kyla's bedroom, the ones Julian had installed because his daughter loved how they made everything magical. For the first time in years, Aaliyah agreed. Everything was magical. 6 months later, Aaliyah stood in the same courthouse where she'd given her devastating testimony against Hayes Consulting Group. But today, the building represented something entirely different: hope, family, the possibility of beginning again. The adoption ceremony was small, just Maya, Simone, a handful of close friends, and several families whose custody had been restored after the Hayes Consulting scandal broke. They'd all insisted on attending, these parents who'd fought through Hayes's biased evaluations to reclaim their children. Patricia Williams, the grandmother who'd lost her grandson to a father with 2 DUIs, sat in the front row, the boy now safely back in her care. The Mexican mother, once deemed culturally incompatible, held her daughter's hand and smiled through tears. Maya gave a speech about courage that made Aaliyah cry. Simone presented her with a framed copy of the new legislation, Aaliyah's Law, advocates had dubbed it, requiring independent oversight of all custody evaluations and prohibiting payment-tiered services. But the moment that mattered most came when Kyla, now 6 years old and wearing her red velvet dress from that first meeting, stood before Judge Martinez, no relation to Julian, though Kyla found this hilarious, and spoke in her clear, confident voice. "Aaliyah is my mom because she chose me, and I chose her, and that's what makes a real family," Kyla declared. "Not because she has to be, but because she wants to be. And also because she knows all the dinosaur names and she makes the best hot chocolate and she makes Daddy laugh again." The judge smiled. "That sounds like an excellent foundation for a family. Dr. Johnson, do you accept the responsibilities of parenthood for this child?" Aaliyah looked at Kyla, at Julian standing beside her with tears in his eyes, at the community of families they'd helped rebuild. She thought of the birthday blind date that had humiliated her, of Brandon's cruelty that had revealed his corruption, of how rejection had led to justice and justice had led to love. "I do," she said. "With all my heart." The courtroom erupted in applause. Kyla jumped into Aaliyah's arms, nearly knocking her over again. Julian wrapped his arms around both of them, and for a moment, they simply stood there, a family, complete and whole. As they left the courthouse, Kyla tugged on Aaliyah's sleeve. "Can we go to Giuseppe's for celebration dinner? I want to show everyone my adoption papers." Aaliyah laughed, remembering that terrible birthday night at the same restaurant. The humiliation. The rage. The careful cataloging of evidence that would eventually bring down an empire of corruption. "Yes, baby," she said. "We can go anywhere you want." Giuseppe's looked exactly the same, the warm lighting, the elegant tables, the Christmas lights that apparently stayed up year-round by popular demand. But everything was different now. The same waiter who'd witnessed Brandon's cruelty seated them with a knowing smile. "Welcome back, Dr. Johnson. I heard about the good work you did. About time someone held those people accountable." They sat at their table, the one where Kyla had first asked a stranger to be her mother, and ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Kyla chattered about her new dinosaur backpack and her plans for first grade and whether they could get a dog named Professor Scales. Under the table, Julian's hand found Aaliyah's. Above them, the Christmas lights glowed just as brightly as they had that terrible night 6 months ago. But this time, Aaliyah saw only beauty in them. Her phone buzzed. A news alert: Brandon Hayes files for bankruptcy following family firm's collapse. She swiped it away without reading the details. Some stories weren't worth following anymore. Some victories were complete. "Mom," Kyla said, testing out the word. "Are you happy?" Aaliyah looked at her daughter, with her bright eyes and her red velvet dress and her complete faith that love was always possible. She looked at Julian, whose grief had transformed into something new, something that included her. She thought of the 47 families reunited, the system reformed, the justice served. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I'm happy." Outside, Chicago prepared for another winter. Inside Giuseppe's, a family celebrated their beginning, not in spite of cruelty and rejection, but because of it. Because sometimes the worst moments crack us open just wide enough for the best things to enter. Aaliyah raised her hot chocolate in a toast. "To new foundations," she said. "To family," Julian added. "To dinosaurs," Kyla shouted, loud enough to turn heads. And in the warm glow of those endlessly twinkling lights, they drank to all three.